So where we had Bourdieu being horizontal and overly social, you could say this is more like vertical analysis. It's a chain network analysis, looking at consumption as a kind of downstream activity connected to upstream activities higher up in the chains, and looking very much at technology as a driver for environmental change. Livia and John told me that they distributed a paper that I had written in 2011, which was more or less organized around this schedule, where I argued that when we make the balance for the studies on sustainable consumption so far, we had basically two approaches dominating the field. The first approach was the approach I just mentioned to you, the environmental science point of view, which very much looks at systems, provisioning systems, production systems, and technological innovation therein. They look at more or less kind of the macro level of systems to improve them in order to also have downstream improvements at the consumer and around the consumer. But the consumer is not very much included in their analysis. If you just make kind of certification systems and labeling systems and you just want to have business-to-business competition evolving around these labels and certifications, then they say, well, we have to introduce those kind of sustainable consumption systems, but don't bother the consumer, because the consumer is basically not interested in this kind of stuff. So what they suggest is greening consumption more or less behind the back of the consumer. So that's at the same time the weakness of what I would call the systemic or structural approach. They are very prominent though in the field, I would argue. When I work with ministries for the environment, policymakers on sustainable consumption, they all the time tell me, Gert, forget about these consumers. They are too difficult, they are too heterogeneous, they are kind of unpredictable in their behavior. Let's go for this one. Let's make a kind of nice technological innovation program on consumption. I think the nice example in Europe at the moment is that, and that's their victory, they just banned the light bulb. The conventional light bulbs, you can no longer buy them in the shop from now on. Officially, they are just removed from stage. So it means that from now on, we will have this kind of more sustainable, energy-saving light bulbs being offered to the consumers, and they have no other choice than to choose the green option. You see, that's the kind of approach that is very prominent in policy circles. And I really want you to consider that. Don't underestimate it, that the neglect of the consumer is very strong in many consumer study departments. The only group that is challenging this approach, I would say, are the psychology people and also marketing, economics, and they work from the individual consumer or citizen consumer primarily. They think that by changing the attitude, the opinions, the values of the individual consumer, then the consumer start pressurizing for change and starts also changing their own behavior. So this is a kind of individualist perspective on sustainable consumption with micro-level interventions as their key topic. They want to have more information brought to the consumers. The consumers learn about the environmental impacts of their behavior, and they start behaving in a different way. Well, this approach, which is very strong, I would say until recently they had more than 50-60% of all the studies were on attitude behavior stuff. So that's why I included in my schedule. These are the two, I would say, dominant approaches. And for an audience like you, and also for a researcher like me, something is missing here. So we need a kind of third way. We need a kind of in-between solution, a different kind of paradigm. And that's where this practice-based approach comes up. So this is behind the work of a network of, I would say, 15 to 25 people that started to work on the practice-based approach to sustainable consumption. We will show some names later in the presentation. But I think what motivated this group was that they wanted to move beyond this dilemma of either a kind of technological driven systemic approach or, let's say, an individualist psychological approach on the other hand. They wanted to specify sustainability in the context of everyday life consumption. And this is new because most of the consumption definitions, they were kind of technical definitions borrowed from the environmental sciences. So what is a sustainable housing like? It is reducing the energy consumption of the households. What is sustainable mobility like? You know, these kind of questions, they were very much kind of technology-oriented definitions of sustainability. If you go to sustainability in everyday life, what does it mean for a householder to act sustainable? Then people don't think in terms of light bulbs and energy emissions of light bulbs, but they think about lighting. They think about what they do with this kind of stuff in their homes, how they make their life with it, their living with it. And I think trying to translate the technical oriented definitions of sustainability to the world of everyday life consumption is a huge effort still in front of us. The third reason why this practice-based approach became popular is that it combines a kind of socio-technical emphasis with a socio-cultural emphasis. So it's a bit of Bourdieu and environmental sciences taken together. That's what they want to bring it to the synthesis. And as well, they want to look both at horizontal and vertical relations in sustainable consumption. So here you have the kind of background why this practice-based approach offers itself as a third way in between a structuralist and an individualist paradigm. That's the first part of my argument. Is it coming through? Okay. Then my second point is that this practice turn is not just there in consumption sociology. I noticed that it's also very popular in the sociology of sports. We had some books reviewed last year in the field of sustainable forest management and practice-based approaches. I did one on spatial planning and practice-based approaches. So my argument is practice theories are kind of spreading in the social science more general. It's not just in the field of sustainable consumption. Sorry. And I just wonder what are the main reasons behind this popularity of practice-based approaches over the past 10, 15 years. Why is it on the increase so much? Well, it's just a few guesses, but maybe you can feel along with me that we are increasing our kind of critical stance towards individualist rational choice theories. It's a kind of micro version of neoliberalism critique. So we now just talk about citizen consumers not just from this kind of rational choice perspective. I think the most fierce criticism of this paradigm is done by Elizabeth Shove. She's my colleague in Lancaster. She has criticized the attitude, behavior, choice model as and that's the same as what I labeled this kind of individual approach to consumption.